Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Magic Hour. I'm your host, MagicLeb, aka Magic. Today's guest is Stasi Kapetanos. He is a spokesperson from the Unionists for Palestine. And Stasi, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on, Majid.
Anytime. Now, could you please tell me what is it that what is it that you do exactly for the Unionists for Palestine? I know that you're a spokesperson from them. But could you please?
I'm a spokesperson. I'm an active member. I help organise things. Sometimes go to events, go to contingents, participate in meetings where I can. It's not a particularly formal setup at the moment in the South Australian branch. We do have a steering committee for quick, important decisions, but I'm not in the governance side of things. I just am someone that turns out on weekends and speaks to people like you or speak to the media on occasion.
How long has the Unionists for Palestine been a thing here in Adelaide?
It started probably late in October last year, so around about this time last year.
Oh, so it's very new.
Yeah. It's as far as I'm aware. It got active as we all saw the Israeli response to to October 7th, and it's quite clear that it was going to escalate and get really bad really quick, and at that stage it already was. From people coming to protests against Israel's genocide in Gaza, back in November and December last year, we started going to meetings and gathering together. One of our original members just had a sign-up sheet that he brought to a protest in front of Penny Wong's office, and quite a few of us signed up. I had a few friends that happened to know each other, and so we all thought, okay, well, if they want to join, they would join. This is probably a good thing. It wasn't just a front group, and we had our first meeting at I can't remember the place now.
That's fine. That's fine. So, in the year that the organization has been running, what kind of impact has it made here in Adelaide with the citizens here in Adelaide? At least, have you been able to succeed in spreading the awareness in some kind? Have you been able to get sponsors or something like that? How has this Unionists for Palestine had a positive impact?
Yeah, look, that's a good question. So, the point of Unionists for Palestine has been to push for support, especially grassroots support amongst the trade unions for the pro-Palestine movement, because that's where it starts. Trade union leaderships are usually the more conservative elements of the organisations, and so they require pushes from the rank and file, from the bottom up. And that's what we've done. We've pushed them to make statements. We've pushed them to come to our rallies, and several unions have. We've pushed them to, encourage the Labor Party to change their stance. That's not something that we've had as much success with, but that's a lot more powerful of a force to do. We've also been, encouraging the Greens to go the right direction and having people from different elements of the pro-trade union political spectrum to come together for common causes and common goals. We got together with the CFMEU and other blue collar unions that support them to protest against to protest at the South Australian Labor Party convention, with support from some members of the Labor Party as well, to oppose their attempts to essentially bust the blue collar union, i.e. To put it under administration and render it ineffective for a period of time, as well as to protest the Labor government's failure on Gaza and the Middle East in general.
Here's a question that everybody wants to ask, that everyone's asking about. Why is it, do you think, that the Labor is deliberately being insensitive or towards the cause for the Palestinians? Why do you believe that they are deliberately looking the other way and avoiding all of these atrocities? Now, a lot of people are trying to justify it, saying Israel had the right to defend itself after what Hamas did on October 7th. What they're doing is necessary and appropriate. which many people disagree. But why is it, do you think, that our government here in Australia and as Australian citizens, why do you feel that? Why do you think that they have neglected the Palestinians?
That's a good question, and that's something we'll all grapple with. And I think a lot of Labor Party members have got to grapple with, as well as politicians. And it's not just the Labor Party; it's also, the Liberal Party. They're meant to be right wing, not far right. The Greens which is what I'm personally a member of, is far superior to either of them, but it could be doing more. And sometimes there is even some people there that just think about this the wrong way. Um, Look, I think at this stage we can all tell that the calls, people saying that Israel has a right to defend itself are really missing the point. And it's, to me, I think it's gotten to a point where that's a genocidal war cry. It's not a legitimate talking point of debate. Um, Now, the the chief argument that you'll hear from members of the Labor Party or from people that want it to do better is, or even just voters, people who go back and forth between them and the Greens and whatever, is that it's because of the US that Australia's subservience to the United States causes it to back these kinds of policies. And there's quite likely truth to that. But we have also seen other countries that, other NATO member states, Australia's not even a NATO member state, but anyway, and other countries with close relationships to the United States taking stands against Israel to some extent or another, and oftentimes doing more than Australia. Okay, there's countries that have been worse as well. And there's countries like Italy that started in a worse position and now doing more than us. But a lot of people feel Australia is in many ways controlled by the United States. Many people in the Labor Party love to fearmonger that perhaps, the Prime Minister would be overthrown the same way Gough Whitlam was. I find those excuses hard to believe. If they're not really willing to risk a bit of US backlash over this, then what would they be willing to risk backlash over? What's the point of a democracy if if the people, Australian people, can't have their way on this and have the Australian government take genuine actions to support a ceasefire and not just issue some, statements out of both sides of their mouths on the topic. So we can't really say for sure. We could also posit it's Australia's relationship with colonialism of Aboriginal and First Nations people here that makes the state somewhat sympathetic to, Israel and Zionism. It could be because the Labor Party is just so afraid of the Liberals that they just want to adopt their policies and not have any thorough political debate and just hope that they can get by off of Greens and Independents doing the real heavy lifting in political debates and discussions. There are a number of reasons that we could posit to think of, but at the end of the day, the truth is that they're just not. They're just not doing the right thing on this issue. They're not living up to what their members want, what the Australian people want, and what is the right thing to do. And I think the latest vote at the UN, where Australia, I believe, abstained when even most of the EU voted that Israel must withdraw from its occupation of Palestine within a year, is disgraceful. And I think it will haunt this government, it will haunt this country, and it will haunt us all until this stops.
But who will haunt us? It will be the people that live here that will haunt their own government. I mean, the people on the outside of Australia wouldn't care less about because they're not here in Australia. Because this is not the first time that this has happened, where Australia has succumbed to the US, or maybe if maybe APAC is calling all the shots for all we know. Because when Bush declared war on Iraq, that was Netanyahu's idea. He actually had a conference meeting saying that you must attack Iraq, but that's just a separate issue. But what happened was Australia at the time was initially against going to war with Iraq. But when Bush gave the call to Howard at the time, he was the former prime minister, when he was the prime minister at the time, all of a sudden Australia was on board. It's like they lost their backbone. At first they were strongly against any war. They did not want to participate in any kind of war. And then all of a sudden they're sending troops to Iraq because Bush said so. Now, I remember about less than a year ago, the Penny Wong made a statement saying that we recognize Palestine. And a few days after that, she retracted that statement. All right. Now, again, the backbone is kind of broken because they are succumbing to the Zionism, or at least America and Zionism. So this is kind of very disappointing because Australia is Australia. We never like Australia is supposed to have their own opinion without having to suffer any kind of backlash or criticism from other Western countries for believing what it believes and doing what it does. Which leads me to now the campaign, the U.S. campaign that is happening. They're going to decide tomorrow, right? The 5th of November is when I think they're going to be deciding who's going to win between Trump and Harris.
Yeah, that's right.
All right.
Before we get to that, I just want to bring up with the Iraq War. I can't really say I remember because I was a small child at the time.
Okay.
9/11 interrupted the Teletubbies for me.
Okay.
And that was the most tragic part about.
Well,
it
I
for
feel
me at the
old.
time.
Okay, I feel old.
But-
I was because I was in university
Yeah.
during that time. So okay, go ahead.
So, I can't really comment too much about Australia's interaction, decision, and ambivalence about getting involved with the war in Iraq. But I do know it was the first politicizing and political event for me and for a lot of people to see U.S. troops in Iraq and in Afghanistan, and we're not really sure why, based off of lies, based off of attempts to extract hydrocarbons and other natural resources from Afghanistan as well. And that was something that's really eroded confidence in government, in the foreign policy establishment, and in a lot of aspects in society and institutions in general. And that was a war that was as unjustified and completely illegal, but did not sink to the lengths lengths of depravity and genocidalism that we're seeing in Palestine today.
No, of course, definitely, it's definitely gotten a lot worse over the years. No, definitely, it's gotten a lot worse, and because Israel, Zionism at least has like a parasite. It's infected the world. They placed themselves in positions of power where everything will always fall to their benefit. Now, a lot of people who are apparently this current election is the closest it's ever been since the JFK and Nixon election back in 1960, because JFK won just over 100,000 votes, which is considered very, very close. And this election now between the two of them is like a horse race. They're neck and neck. Now, in my opinion, I don't think it matters at all who wins, because whoever wins is still going to benefit Israel, and I don't think anything's going to change in terms of the Middle East. If anything, it would either stay the same or be a lot worse. I think it's going to get worse before it gets any better.
Well, it's hard to tell. I don't think that the American election really is the chief gauge of what will happen. I do agree with you on that. I do think it will matter, but not in the sense of like if X wins, then Y will happen. I don't think we can truly quantify these things, especially because of how incompetent the a Trump administration will be, or how effective at lying the Democrats are. So they say one thing and do another. We really can't fully tell. There will definitely be some different outcomes based off of who wins, but what those outcomes will be is hard to determine. It's more like it might be a shift of, attacking Syria instead of attacking Lebanon, or attacking West Bank instead of attacking Gaza. We can't. I take the view that we can't really be certain, and it doesn't just depend on the president. There's also the Congress as well. But the extent to which they really control things is also quite questionable. And I think that's an issue with a lot of foreign policy, not just in America, but in the West in general. It's become outside of political debate. Security issues are meant to be, just settled by the elites. And same thing with economic issues, same thing with a lot of issues, but this is where it's worse. They don't want public input, but the public has a lot to say, and political elites are leading us astray.
Just a personal question, right? Who do you think is going to win the election between Trump and Harris?
I personally take the view that it will be a tie. I think American elections are getting. You mentioned the RFK and JFK and Nixon. I think in general, since in my entire lifetime, American elections have been getting closer and closer and closer and closer. I think fewer and fewer states switch, and I think as the Democrats and Republicans just do the bare minimum to try to win in a specific area instead of actually winning over all the argument, which is the same thing that's happening in a lot of areas in politics, the chances of a tie become more statistically significant, even though it's not likely in any one race. I think a tie or something very close to it will happen. If Kamala, for example, or Trump win by 270 and then one of the electors decides to do something a bit random and throw it off, that you could still have a tie. I do think that the chances of a very close result, a tie, and maybe even a contingent election are possible. But at the end of the day, America's not really a democracy, even in this electoral college system.
Oh, they never have been, in my opinion, but yeah.
The electoral college system, the electors are not necessarily bound to vote a specific way. So some of them are, but not always. So we can't say exactly what they will do. We could probably estimate that most of them will vote for what they're meant to do, but when it's a really close race, we can't be certain.
Okay. Well, because this is one of the closest elections in American history. Go ahead, you do what you like. Just be yourself. They say it's the closest election which can be decided with as little as 10,000 votes, tens of thousands of votes. So it's like 20, 30,000, maybe 40,000, not knowing which way it's leaning to. But that's how close it is, and that's incredibly close. Now, in my opinion, and a lot of you Americans are going to hate me for saying that, but I don't care. I don't think...
Do you have many American listeners?
Oh, yeah, I've got a lot of American friends. But they all live in Bahrain. They all live in the Gulf. I met them there. So it's okay. No, but we're tight. We're tight. It's okay. Yeah, we talk politics all the time. I truly believe that the people's vote in the States does not matter at all, and every election for the last 10 to 20 years has been rigged. This is my opinion. I believe that all this that's going on, the campaign, the endorsements, the money, the support that they get, is just one big gigantic distraction. And to see who Israel wants as president, what AIPAC wants as president. Because a woman named Miriam Adelson, she is a Israeli politician. She owns an Israeli newspaper. She just contributed $100 million to Trump's campaign, which surpasses Elon Musk's contribution of $75 million that he gave to Trump for his campaign. On the condition, she is from the American policy on Israel. Yeah, that's right. She works as the American policy on Israel for the Palestine conflict. Now, and she has a newspaper called the Israeli Hayom. Now, in exchange for that $100 million, she denies, although somebody had confirmed, in exchange for that $100 million, that Trump would help Israel secure a piece, if not all, of the West Bank, if he becomes president. Now, I'm pretty sure Kamala would have agreed to do the same thing, but they didn't give Kamala the $100 million. They are wanting Trump over Harris, obviously, and he's accepted the money already. Now, her spokesperson denied that she's supporting Trump for Israel's annexation of the West Bank. But Rabbi, if I'm saying this name correctly, Rabbi Shmuley Baltek told the New York Times that the establishment of that there will be against that they are against the establishment of a Palestinian state.
Well, look, you went through a lot of stuff there. I think it's important to clarify, because it's important to understand dynamics and relationships of power, that it's not these, Israeli lobbyists that are the central force behind it all, in my opinion. I'm not speaking on behalf of U4P here, but I think we'd all broadly agree. This is the state of Israel is a wedge for US power in the Middle East and in the world. It helps separate Africa, Asia, and Europe. It's a source of instability, war, and conflict, which America wants to allow it to maintain its relatively privileged economic position, not for the ordinary citizen, of course, and to prevent free, fair, and open trade and exchange and political integration between Africa, Asia, and Europe. If those three things, if that happened, or even if just two of those continents got together, the United States and England, and Australia could go either way in this, but the United States and the United Kingdom would be marginal, and their hegemony over the maritime, over the world's oceans would be dwarfed by a new Silk Road that connects the vast majority of the world's population and resources. So that's the point of view that I have on this, and I think that this is all in the interest of capital, of American capital, and these Zionists, they think they're so smart. They think they're that tricking an Oklahoma politician into saying something racist or purchasing an election race in New York really makes them the master political operators. But I personally think that they are being played for this Anglo-American imperial interest.
You think the Zionists are being played?
Absolutely, and I think that
really,
if for whatever reason they're just too much of a liability, or they fail in their goals, or they create too much instability, they will be dropped. Just like all of America's other buddies, like when it comes like those military dictators in South Vietnam, or those sub-fascists in Latin America, or far right groups in Eastern Europe, or drug cartels. When America doesn't need its dogs, it puts them down.
Yeah, but the thing is, Zionists aren't the dogs. I believe they are the owners of the dogs. I mean, Zionism since the late 1800s.
Which Zionists, though? Do you mean the Israeli Zionists, or the Christian Zionists that came up?
Well, there are Christian Zionists, but they work hand in hand with Israeli Zionists.
But who started all this?
Let's go back to 1897. A man named Theodor Herzl formed the World Zionist Organization. He advocated for the creation of a Jewish state in Palestine, and is even mentioned in the Israeli Declaration of Independence. It was tough to be a Jew in Europe in that time, with anti-Semitic sentiments rising. Herzl felt the only way for his people to live in peace was for them to have their own country. Palestine was chosen, and a popular slogan started spreading around the world. A land without a people, for a people without a land.
Zionism, Jewish Zionism, they abandoned Judaism, basically, because Zionists do not believe, Jewish Zionists, you can't call yourself a Jewish Zionist. You're either Jewish or you're Zionist. But if you are from a Jewish descent who becomes a Zionist, you can't be religious and Zionist, because Zionists don't believe in God, whereas Judaism are very religious people that follow the Torah.
Across history, we've seen people pervert, twist, and change religion in so many different ways. Sometimes it's just an innocuous event that happens due to, Christianity or Islam spreading in a particularly unique place where people have different sort of understandings of the world or a certain period of history. And sometimes you see perversions like, religious settler Zionism in Israel, or Christian, apocalyptic Christian evangelicalism in the United States, and unfortunately even Australia. And, we've seen it with, extremists who did terrible things in the name of Islam as well. We've seen it with crusaders.
Yeah, no, of course. No. Crusaders and extremists, all right, they are a separate entity to Zionism. Zionists are more organized. They're more structured. They have more global influence. And extremists are a small group of people.
You don't think crusaders have influence?
We're talking centuries ago.
But like the neo-crusaders, like the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, that was the same impulse in many ways.
But in centuries past, they really it was a crusade. They basically traveled almost the entire world spreading that message. All right.
Spreading the message. That's one way to put it.
I'm going to dial it down a little bit because they did travel the world pushing, for when during the crusade, so they had more influence back then. Does it still happen? I don't think much has changed. Atrocities will always continue. Change will always continue. But if you want to make a distinction between a well-constructed organization like AIPAC, Zionist, Jewish lobbies, next to comparing that to people who are extremists, like the ones that want to commit martyrs and whatever, it's not apples and oranges. They are completely different because one actually holds more power than the other. One will make a difference, but it's like a pin drop, where the other one that make a difference, it's like a sledgehammer. The whole world hears it.
I do think that the Zionist lobby groups are in some ways built on a house of cards. They're not as strong or as influential as people think they are. I think
I have to disagree with you on that one.
Other power centers that use them for their own ends. America and the real power plays in America and Israel, in America and in the United Kingdom, and the people in the essentially the military-industrial complex and the deep state don't have any special affinity for Jews, or probably not necessarily even for Zionists, but they use them for their own capitalistic ends.
I believe it's the other way around. I'm happy that we're having this debate because I actually believe it's the other way around. Biden himself 3 years ago said, "I am a Zionist." I could not believe he said it. He said it during a press conference. "I am a Zionist." Being an admitted Zionist, what Zionist means today, being an Israeli Zionist, and he does for every president for God knows how far back going in history has supported Israel. Why? They just automatically and unconditionally and blindly support them, regardless of the atrocity. They know the atrocity that they're doing, and they're continuing to arm them. They're continuing to supply them. Do you think this is what America wants? All right. As far as the people go, I don't think it's what the American people want. But
and as far as they are able to understand what's happening,
if they understand, half of them don't even care what's going on. All right. I wouldn't say half, but a large percentage of American citizens do not care what is happening because it doesn't affect their lives in the least. At least that's what they believe. Now, as far back as I can remember, in terms of American history, every president has supported Israel by default. Now, how did that happen? You see, it's because they did. They have influenced them in a way. Jews used the Holocaust to get sympathy. Anybody that says anything negative or even as small as disagreeing with them, you're labeled as an anti-Semitic. They have used that as a weapon for many years.
Because obviously, the way, in particular, Zionist groups tend to use the Holocaust, obviously, really has done a lot of damage to the memory of that genocide,
and it's damaging to real people, real Jewish people.
And they do it, and it's not just something that they use to attack the pro-Palestine movement. If you read about Israeli politics, you'll see how they'll throw it at each other, left and right, in ways that are quite, shocking and would never be tolerated in any other society. But there is also amongst anti-Zionist elements in the Jewish community, or even those strange people that happen to be Zionists but also wanted things to turn out differently. They do also use this legacy to say what we're doing is wrong and this needs to be done differently. But there's obviously is, as Norman Finkelstein wrote, a bit of a Holocaust industry that is used by the military-industrial complex in order to essentially create a smokescreen for more genocides. And that's what I think is quite disgusting about a lot of Zionist and pro-Zionist politicians. They'll use the deaths of so many millions of people, not just Jewish people in the Holocaust, and what happened to people on October 7th, and they will spin that in order to feed the cycle and make it worse, without any care at all for any genuine peace deal or safety for obviously not for the Palestinians, because they're essentially genocidal racists, but also not for the safe, but it's also against the safety of all even Israeli settlers who like settlers in the West Bank should be kicked out, but we don't. But like we want to avoid violence where we can. For Jewish people around the world, as well as Arab Muslim communities around the world, and even for the legacy of Christianity in the Middle East. Like this is destroying that, and the reason why I circled back to the Crusaders is because they're the ones that did the far more damage to Christians in the Middle East than any Arab or Muslim conquerors who may have done the wrong thing.
Interesting point. Do you feel that people in general, just citizens around the world, are starting to see what's really happening? I mean, for decades, Israel has hidden their atrocities because they have controlled every major news outlet. They already own Sky News, they own Fox News, CNN, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. But since social media, I think that's something they did not anticipate, because social media now, you have wannabe journalists and amateur journalists and semi-professional journalists who are documenting themselves what is happening that the main media news is not showing. Truth has been told from all these from the people around the world who are seeing what they're seeing, and they're filming them themselves. Now, do you think because of that, it has changed the world's view of what's really been going on all this time?
Well, look, I think that there's always been a lot of opposition to the way that Israel's treated the people of Palestine. I think it's been around for a long time. And even the mainstream media, with all of its, influence and control and, psychotic framing, hasn't succeeded in that. And in a lot of places in the world, the mainstream media is the one that first exposed people to this. Now, the mainstream media, I take the view that it's controlled by, first and foremost, by capitalists, some sort of white supremacists, and, their commitment to Zionism comes out of an extension of projecting US power and domination. And so they haven't always been that particularly effective, or even always as prioritizing shutting down what's Israeli atrocities in the Middle East. I think that that's something that's escalated a lot in the last 20 to 30 years, particularly as Israel has become more and more unhinged and irrational in its actions, not just in the way that it treats Palestinians, but also the way it conceptualizes itself and its own actions, and its disinterest in even attempting to understand itself and what it's doing wrong and how it could improve, and that's why it's heading down onto the road of collapse. But look, onto social media, mainstream media. Absolutely, social media is an exploding and dynamic new area. With all of its faults, it is doing a lot to expose, the Israeli, the state of Israel's genocide of Palestine and aggression in Lebanon, and it's also doing the same thing in other areas whether it comes to destruction of the environment or violation of people's personal rights, like we saw with Black Lives Matter in the United States, for example. This is an especially challenging time for the media industrial complex and that element of the economic and political elite. And social media is a threat to them. They are trying to control it. They are trying to centralize it.
Who's trying to control what?
Well, I mean, the US government and the Australian government, there have been people getting together to try to, do things from banning TikTok to creating, misinformation rules that I personally think are just attempts to corral social media. They might want to cut off the fat of Elon Musk, which, good luck to him, but they will also do it in other areas as well in order to centralize control and power perhaps in the hands of someone like Mark Zuckerberg and the Meta Corporation, because that's the natural tendency of capitalism. It is towards hegemony and monopoly.
A new state of control.
And when that doesn't happen automatically through market forces, it will happen through their attempts to influence the government in their own interest.
Okay. See, now, never had there been any attempts to ban any social media platform. Nobody ever wanted to try to ban YouTube or Instagram. This only occurred when truth started coming out, when the world started to listen to what's really going on. When this affected Israel, when this gave Israel a big negative impact, all of a sudden the banning debate has begun.
Look, there was musings about banning it before. Countries like Russia and China had.
But for what reasons?
The reasons were essentially people in the establishment that might have had a bit more foresight into seeing that TikTok and Meta and others they couldn't control them, and when there wasn't really as much to be concerned about from them, when there are issues that they were able to deflect from, like Black Lives Matter, how the Democrats deflected that to support for Biden and the police. They were not as aggressive about it, but I think what you've seen is a renewed aggressive and desperate push to try to control and destroy these avenues, because they exist outside of the traditional capitalist and
Traditional and
structures.
controlled.
But that doesn't mean they won't try to. Perhaps they will succeed in some sort of bans or muzzling, but it's probably more likely that they will try to work with these companies and try to control them, carrot and stick approach, giving them some power as well. It could just be that these social media companies themselves will leverage their own forms of power to benefit themselves and their shareholders, and how the war in Gaza or the genocide will play out.
I have no doubt that they'll be able to influence the people that are controlling these social media platforms. But what they cannot do, what nobody in the world can do, is control every single individual amongst us. Every one of us, they cannot control. Like, if I have an opinion that I want to say that negatively hurts Israel, all right, they're trying to come up with a new law now. You cannot criticize us. They're trying to do everything they can to protect themselves. They're even trying to make themselves immune to criticism. All right, but the truth is the truth, whether it's against them or if it's for them. If it's the truth, it's the truth. If there's something that there's a saying. I want to share this saying. An Israel threat to Arabs is, if you come against us, I will tell the world lies about you so they can hate you. And the Arab response is, fine, tell lies about us because we will tell the world the truth about you. And that is Israel, and to my opinion, is Israel's kryptonite, the truth. And the truth has been spreading like wildfire. I have not seen how many people today who have turned against Israel than I did 20 years ago. 20 years ago, everything was pro-Israel.
You're totally right about that. But this is what happens when you have a new avenue of communications. Like when the printing press first came out, people were using it to make crude images of, the Queen of France in a gangbang.
That's fine. But they weren't using it to lie.
Well, maybe they were. But my point was more so that it was a new avenue of communication and expression that the traditional political elite didn't know how to control and didn't know what to do with. An element of them had their heads chopped off, and another element of them worked with the new elite, the capitalists, the bourgeois, and they built the society we have today. And with the emergence of radio, they had similar challenges. I think television was a bit more of a stupid medium, so perhaps,
very, very revolutionary though at the time,
true. But they've imposed controls and regulations that make barriers to entry harder. But that's okay, because there'll always be new explosive forms of technology and communication that will undermine traditional paradigms and power structures. So as much as I'm against their attempts to control and muzzle and destroy elements of social media, I'm not staying up at night worrying about it because there will always be something else.
No, of course, but at this point where we have reached, they will fail trying to ban any social media outlet. Let's say they were successful and they banned TikTok and they banned Instagram. All right, the next day a new social media platform will be released, and the same thing will happen. It would be like a domino effect. It can be like, can you take back the invention of television? Once the TV has been invented, can you disinvent it? You
The
can't.
more dangerous thing is that they might consolidate it under the hands of a small number of people, and what they might do to society in the short term in order to enrich themselves could be very, very dark. And we've seen the lengths that they will go to in Israel.
Oh, of course. I'm never surprised on how low they can go. But what they are doing to try to control the situation as best as they can, even if it's limited control, a huge part of the funding that Israel gets, they spend a large amount in social media managing to see who's commenting
How's
on
that
what.
working out for them?
All right. It's not working out as well as they would hope, but what they are doing is, right, like Zionists are, their main objective is to defend Israel at all costs, to defend their atrocities at all costs, and to attack anybody that says anything positive about Arab states, Arab countries, Arab people.
It depends which Arab states.
It doesn't matter, right? They are against all. They're not just attacking Palestine. Now that they've attacked Syria and Lebanon, they are trying now. They are attempting to want to destroy Lebanon's historical landmarks as an attempt to destroy its history. You know, we have Baalbek, we have Tripoli, Trapolis. The Greek way of saying Tripoli. They're trying to destroy these ancient cities as a way of erasing a past that they no longer exist. Like, Israel doesn't have any historical landmarks that date back thousands of years in what was known as Palestine. If anything, it belonged to Palestine. But what they are trying to do...
The Jewish history is also Palestinian history.
Exactly right. But
Where
the thing...
did people think Palestinians came from? The moon? No. They're also descendants of the local people, as well as other people that moved around the same way that most other people are.
Israelis and Jewish people have two different mentalities entirely. Jewish people and Arabs lived amongst each other peacefully for centuries. They never had this kind of conflict. But going back to this whole social media thing, they spent money monitoring anybody that says anything positive. There's always a response in return. If you said something that was against them that they found offensive, they will block or erase that message, and they'll give you a warning saying you have violated the guidelines. You're not allowed to say this. This is offensive. This is this and this is that.
I just want to talk about, you mentioned about, like Jewish people and Arab people living in peace before Zionism. Like, from people that I've spoken to and what I've read, it's not perfect, but human society never was.
No. There's always been conflict. There's always been disagreement.
What I wanted to sort of get to was that the level of persecution and paranoia that came over Jewish people because of anti-Semitism was, it's not entirely unjustified, and it's a European event. It's European Jews that suffered the extreme amounts of persecution that sent them go from one country to the other, to facing extermination. That's, all people around the world have faced some level of persecution, but Jews in Europe, alongside the Romani, are the people that have faced it uniquely badly, alongside other people that were colonized by European settler colonialists. This sort of religious and ethnic supremacist doctrine that probably comes a lot from the Crusades has been mirrored by, some extremists in the Islamic world, is also the same, bug that's infected Israel. And I think and you see this in other sort of apartheid projects as well. The white South Africans, before they instituted apartheid in South Africa, were held in concentration camps by the British. A lot of the, Americans who were amongst the most racist and supporters of slavery came from some of the poorest and most deprived parts of England, Scotland, and Ireland. It's this sort of kick the ladder down and kick the can down the road kind of situation where capitalists encourage groups of people to attack one another and take what one another rightfully has in order to not look at the fact that, they're the ones extracting the real profits and rents. And in particular, in this circumstance, I mean really powerful capitalists, the ones that have influence over the state and have major economic power.
But all those, the apartheid, the slavery, they all came to an end in some form. I mean, of course, there's still injustices happening. Nothing's become perfect. Will Israel's apartheid over Palestine, will that ever come to an end? I mean, in the foreseeable future, we would like to believe that it will, because evil like that has to come to an end. If it ended in South Africa, why shouldn't it end in Palestine? And Nelson Mandela once said, if the Palestinian people aren't free, then we are not free. Do you think there is an end to this at all, or would it continue? Would it be ongoing continuously forever?
I think that the state of Israel, at the very least as it currently is not a sustainable project economically, politically.
Well, right now they have suffered economically in a big way.
Socially as well.
Yeah.
From, boycotts and divestments and sanctions to, the axis of resistance coming together to interrupt the key economic nodes that Israel relies on. Governments like Egypt that do seem to enable Israel are facing real risk of collapse over this issue. And Western powers are, losing a lot of face over this. I don't think it's a coincidence that BRICS has been aggressively growing, most of all in the Islamic world, because of this, even countries traditionally allied to the United States. And likewise, popular perceptions, especially amongst young people, are really changing the way that governments and politicians are interacting, in particular interacting with Israel. I think we saw, for example, in the last Australian elections, how generational shift on climate change changed the parliament and the political discourse in the course of 3 years. And I think we'll definitely see the same thing on Israel. Like the biggest correlation between support and sympathy for them isn't, left wing or right wing or even perhaps, rich and poor. It seems to be the old, who rely on mediums that the television and newspaper that just emotionally manipulate them, and younger people that are capable of study and independent research. And without that support, perhaps the United States will continue to funnel and prop up Israel, but it's increasingly making it a liability. Like if Kamala Harris is risking losing the election over Israel, if someone like Donald Trump is possibly going to be elected over frustrations over this issue, then it will lead to the establishment going, okay, we need to get a handle of things. It could lead to them deciding that it's not really that profitable. It could lead to them deciding to find a new avenue of attacking the emerging economic order in Eurasia. And it's distracting a lot of the foreign policy elites in America from their real objective, which is to stop or at least control China. Like America's key interest and some of the most important political issues right now, geopolitical issues right now, is control over the straits, or at least influence and monitoring of it in the South China Sea and around Malaysia and the Indian Ocean. And the Asia Pacific is where it's at. And the Americans feel quite bogged down in the Middle East. That's why so many of them want to cut Ukraine loose. It's not because they've decided that they don't feel positively towards Zelensky anymore. It's because, elements of the foreign policy establishment think that it's a distraction and a waste of their resources.
Mm-hmm. Well, I honestly believe that countries like China and Russia are they are doing what they're doing, and America is completely distracted with what's happening in the Middle East. That what they're not realizing what's going on is that who knows what China and Russia and North Korea and all the other countries are
I don't think
gathering
I
up.
think you're right about China. I don't think it's Russia. I think they're quite focused on Russia probably more than they want to be. I think it's probably more so countries like, okay, definitely China, India, perhaps, a lot of Southeast Asian countries are very dynamic and growing, and they do have a lot of productive potential. I think the United States sees itself as the gatekeeper of Latin America, and I think they sometimes feel like they've been too distracted to fulfill that role properly. I don't think they want Brazil emerging as an alternative, as a sort of Southern Hemisphere rival to them, and likewise, Africa is a place with a growing population, lots of resources, and unfortunately, this is plagued with violence and terror and even genocide. It's one of the few places where it's continue to happen, but almost commonly. But if China and India are focused on developing those places and making money, and America just isn't, then
Then it's going to get bloody.
yeah, and even their European partners like the French will think who's more useful here.
Well, I definitely believe China is better influence for Africa than any other country at this point. I mean, they just kicked the French out. All right, they obviously they made it very clear they don't want much of an American
It
influence.
wasn't the Chinese that kicked the French out.
No.
The
The Africans. The Africans
yeah,
kicked the French out. All right, China is a better fit for Africa because they have more to offer Africa. They're not stealing from Africa the way the French were stealing from Africa, the way USA plans to
it's
steal from
interesting.
Africa.
People like to talk about China and its internal abuses and problems, and many of those are definitely real. But people often get confused and they'll think that a society that's doing the right thing here is by default doing the right thing there. I think people get mixed up in some sort of moralistic games like this is Superman or something. The British Empire, when they're at their most exploitative of the third world, was also an avenue for freedom, intellectual discussion, the emergence of women's rights. And I think people need to be aware and not play those games in the wrong way, and to assume that because of something that happened in Hong Kong, that therefore the Chinese will be repressive of the Africans and the Africans will reject them and come back to their white saviors, because that's not going to happen. And if Australia internalizes this mindset, we'll be on the losing side of history.
That's the dilemma now. Which side of history do we want to be on? Well, that's a very good point. Now, let's in order to wrap things up, I'm gonna come back to my original question because you gave me an answer, but I wasn't satisfied with the answer.
Okay.
I just want to hear it straight out. Who do you think is going to win the election between Trump and Kamala? If you had to choose.
Well, look, if it's going to be a tie, which is what I'm saying, and I think it's becoming increasingly statistically likely, a tie would lead to Trump winning, assuming that Congress goes his way. But with the Electoral College, you don't know whether they might be afraid of the pressures in Trump and might just throw it in his direction so they don't get death threats, or they'll resent Trump, and if there's just one or two, they could throw it the other way. So when it comes to the Electoral College will favour Trump. And I don't think that Trump will win the most votes. I think that will be Kamala. But when it comes to the states, that's an inbuilt mechanism to favour the Republicans and favour Trump. So I do think that makes him more likely to be president, but I wouldn't throw more than $25 on it.
Okay, fair enough. That's a fair answer. I honestly just think Trump will win because America's racist. They don't want a black woman, especially a woman and a black woman, to be president.
If America is racist, which it definitely is, but no, I don't think it is in this sense. Like they had a black man president.
Yeah.
Maybe it was more logical to argue that they're sexist from that point of view, but I don't really buy that either.
No. The thing. Okay, Obama being the first black president, he couldn't have been a more of a whiter person. He just did exactly what all other presidents
But
did.
people say the same thing about Kamala.
Look, any president that comes after Bush is going to look like a genius. Okay, let's just say that. All right. I mean, he was still a murdering bastard.
That's why people sometimes argue that Trump is competent because he didn't start too many wars. That he did a better job than Bush.
I believe he did do a better. The thing is, the reason why Trump gets such a bad rap is because he doesn't articulate himself very well. He does sound like an asshole. He does sound like an idiot.
If he articulated himself better, he would still be bad. I think his lack of articulation sometimes led him escape judgment from certain things that
he's not very presidential. Okay, he doesn't.
That's true. But
right?
but that's also a source of support. That's a double-edged sword.
But he knows how to play the game, and he won the first time. He played it and he won. He knows how to play the game.
But he's been sinking his own sides since then.
Name me a president who wasn't so self-righteous.
But most presidents, like if you look at Biden, for example, as terrible he's been before the war in Gaza. Really, it's the genocide. It's not a conflict. It's not a war. It's a genocide. That's what we say on the streets, right? He was coming across as rather competent. He's expanding the strength of his party at the in the midterms, which isn't typical. The Democrats seem to be on the up and growing, and the Democrat Party presidential candidates on the side seems to be getting stronger and stronger relative to the Republicans. And Trump sometimes has to copy or sort of give lip service to some of their ideas instead of being a hard down the party line kind of guy because of this. So I'm not saying that Trump is the only president that's ever done this, but I do think that he is sort of sinking his party, and in particular by not leaving. But what would that be like without him? That could be even worse off. We don't know for sure.
Well, we will know by tomorrow. Tomorrow being what's tomorrow? Tomorrow being the 5th of November is when they'll elect the new president. Stasi, I want to thank you for being a guest. Thanks for coming on to the show.
Thanks for having me on.
Anytime. Are you having another protest on Sunday?
We don't. U4P doesn't run the protest, so sometimes we have contingents. We haven't had independent contingents lately, just because the protests have been smaller, so you're just easier to find people there. But if it picks up again, we'll have our own. And there is a protest in the city, 2 p.m. every Sunday. It's not always run by the same people, but they tend to alternate. But between Parliament House and Rundle Mall, there'll always be one 2 p.m. every Sunday.
Well, there you have it. I'm pointing at the Instagram page right here. Bang, Unionists For Palestine. Be sure to follow them and join the cause. Thanks for joining us on another episode of Magic Hour. I've been your host, MagicLeb. Please be sure to follow me on my YouTube channel at Magic and Dairy and on my Instagram at Fame Film Agency. And until next time, y'all take care.